On May the 18th, 1917, in the Châtelet Theatre in Paris, the curtain went up on what looked like a cubist collage of bizarre characters. They might have come from an avant-garde circus, but they appeared to be putting on a kind of weird dream sequence entertainment in the middle of a Paris suburb. A Chinese conjurer, a little American girl, a French manager, and an American manager. These were some of the people who were coming and going to a surrealistic musical score. There were semi-impressionistic suggestions, garish waltzes, ragtime and jazz, and also violent, discordant explosions. And in the orchestra were a typewriter, a ship's siren, rifle shots, and a row of tuned bottles that were filled with varying amounts of water. The composer was Erik Satie. The scenario was by Jean Cocteau. The set, designs, costumes and curtain were by Pablo Picasso. The choreography was by Leonid Massin. He was now Sergei Diaghilev's #1 star choreographer after Diaghilev had fired Václav Nijinsky following a bitter personal dispute. And the program notes were written by the poet Guillaume Apollinaire. What a lineup! And conducting in the pit was the latest brilliant young musician to join the Ballets Russes, Ernest Ansermet. The ballet was called Parade, and it had a double face. It was a satire on contemporary technological life, and it was also a subtle exploration of dreams and the subconscious, and especially in the way that Satie ingeniously wove together so many unrelated images into weird dreamlike sequences in the music. Once again, Sergei Diaghilev's Ballets Russes was taking music, dance and theatre on a quantum leap into the future.
Satie, again, to say the influence that Ballets Russes would have on the future, that influenced very much John Cage, who afterwards was working mainly with Merce Cunningham. So you see there is always a link which goes further on, because it's like a sort of chain, and there is always a relais which is taken by another genius.
There was always this injunction from Diaghilev, étonne-moi, astonish me, surprise me, do something different. Which Cocteau again seized on, said you have the typewriters in the orchestra, the first time that typewriters, I think, were used in an orchestra. And this, of course, leads on to Mosolov and all sorts of things, and Boetism in the 1920s.
Putting a typewriter in the orchestra, in fact, was not just an effect for novelty. It had a heavily ironic purpose. It turns up all of a sudden in the middle of a jazz rag, which is called the ragtime du paquebot, and that's danced by a petite fille américaine, little American girl. Ragtime du paquebot translates the liner rag. Liner? Well, that rag had originally been called Ragtime du Titanic, referring directly to the disaster 5 years earlier, when the Titanic liner had sunk with a loss of more than 1,500 lives. And that's where the scene is all of a sudden set. While people on board the Titanic are having a whale of a time with a late-night dance, a Morse code machine is typing out an SOS telegraph. Jean Cocteau wrote in the scenario, "Here one hears the telegraph machine all by itself. Disasters. Help." On goes the dance, oblivious to everything, for now. When it ends, Cocteau put in the scenario, tick, 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 the Titanic, deep and bright in the sea. The character of the Petite Fille Américaine is a mixture of the kind of American music hall and silent cinema characteristics that were brilliantly mingled together by Satie in Parade. However, there was a whiff of Ballets Russes scandal in the air. The way-out music and the conundrum-filled stage action provoked booing and hissing on the first night. And according to Jean Cocteau, there was some physical fighting between those in favour and those against, recalling more than a touch of the famous riot at the premiere of Le Sacre du Printemps, The Rite of Spring, 4 years earlier. Cocteau's account has since been disputed, but we do know for sure that there definitely was another kind of scandal in Parade's wake. The critic Jean Pouy lambasted the ballet as an outrage on French taste. He accused it of being unpatriotic while France was embroiled in World War I, and he rammed his review home by condemning Satie for his lack of wit, skill and inventiveness. Satie was incensed, and he began sending Pouy a series of extremely obscene comments that were written on single-sided postcards, so they were readable not only by the postal staff, but also by the residents of the apartment where Pouy lived. Pouy took Satie to court, and the composer ended up being sentenced to a week in prison. But fortunately for him, the intervention of a very influential friend and patron of Diaghilev managed to use her influence so that this was commuted to a suspended sentence. Most important about Parade, though, is that once again Sergei Diaghilev had provided the stimulus for another groundbreaking innovation that, as Marie-Christine von Soppen and Roger Nichols mentioned before, opened up vitally new vistas of influence for the futures of both music and dance. Although Cocteau was correct in claiming that the idea, the concept and the story were all his own, it was Diaghilev who had brought Parade to fruition and made it work so brilliantly well by once again bringing in the most extraordinary lineup of artists to innovate together for his Ballets Russes.